Is Canada about to head into another snap election? Can't rule that possibility out. Everyone's incredibly angry at the US ambassador to Canada. And is the entire province of Alberta about to collapse under a sea of labor unrest? Everything's going fine here in Canada. That's what we're talking about today on The Line with your hosts, Jen Gerson and Matt Gurney.
This episode of the Line podcast is brought to you by Forestry For The Future. Canada's housing crisis demands bold, scalable solutions. Build Canada Homes is an opportunity to leverage Canadian wood in modern construction. Wood-based methods like mass timber and modular construction can significantly reduce build times, waste, and carbon emissions while supporting local economies. Expanding building codes, streamlining approvals, and prioritizing domestic wood in federal projects could double demand and foster job creation in rural and northern communities. Despite trade challenges and market volatility, a partnership between industry and government is vital to stabilize the sector, enhance competitiveness, and deliver innovative, sustainably sourced Canadian wood products for homes across Canada and abroad. With capacity growing across provinces, stable demand and predictable financing are key to unlocking the sector's potential. We need to build Canada Homes with Canadian wood. To learn more, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. Great intro. I was a little disappointed you did not mention that if we're being realistically here, I've been looking at the TV ratings. We are the Blue Jays pregame show tonight at best. Have you, I know you're not into the sports ball, but I was looking at the TV ratings. An astonishing percentage of the Canadian population is watching the baseball right now. So we're going to keep this podcast nice and tight so that it is done in time for anyone who is not on trick-or-treating duty to actually settle in, watch the baseball. I confess this, Jen, I am a 100% bandwagon Jays fan. Like I can only do one sport at a time, and normally I prioritize the Leafs. But the Leafs have had a slow start. The Jays are in the World Series. We're going to talk U.S. politics in a segment. Wouldn't it be a great time for a Canadian team to win the World Series?
It would, in fact, be a great time for a Canadian to win at the sports ball. I highly support all of your passion
the hell out of that.
For the sports ball. Look, I think no one will be shocked to discover that I'm perhaps not the normative Canadian. So, but I can understand enough about my fellow humans to understand that the passion for the sports ball is real, and I respect your passion.
I wouldn't say I'm super passionate about this because baseball is not my sport, but I know baseball enough to know good baseball when I see it. Mm-hmm. And with a couple of exceptions, it's been great baseball, and I'm having a good time, and it suits the moment. So I remember
attending Jays games in the 90s when they were winning, and that was a big deal. I remember it. I remember that. It was cool.
Look, baseball is one of these weird sports where the regular season I just don't pay attention, but the playoffs are great. So, and the Jays are on a great run. We also did
really well a couple years ago with the basketball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other sports balling. Yeah,
the other sports ball.
The ice balling not going so well for Toronto right now.
Ice
but that's
balling
okay.
Not so much, but the other sports ball we're doing pretty well, and I think that's wonderful for us. That's
very
good.
High performance sports ball. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So my daughter is I think my daughter Jen is more cut from your cloth because her interest in this is all right. Local sports team going deep on a big run, meaning social activities, meaning snacks. Like she's got this figured out. She's like, okay, the further they go into the playoffs, do the snacks get better? And they do. So that I think is something we can bond all Canadians with, sports ball and snacks.
Cool. Moving on. Let's talk about the budget. And the reason why we have to talk about the budget, which is absolutely more interesting than the sports ball.
I don't want to.
Twofold. One, we're hearing chatter, and I think it is a possibility, not a high possibility, but it is a possibility that the budget's not going to pass. I still think the odds of that are maybe 15%, but 15% is too high for us to ignore, because if the 15% comes to pass, that means that we will soon find ourselves in an election. And the reason why that is, of course, is because a budget is a confidence measure. We should have had a budget last spring, but of course, in the midst of that political chaos, that budget didn't happen. So we've switched the budgets from the spring to the fall. And of course, this is one of the measures that can bring a government down. If a government cannot receive majority support to allocate funds, then a government cannot function. We're seeing how that plays out in the United States right now. You'll remember they're actually in a state of shutdown.
They have no
and of course,
they're coming up on a month with no government.
Yeah, coming up on a month now. And on top of that, we have, I will remind everybody that the Liberals do not have a majority. They have a very, very strong minority. They have, I believe, 116.
I checked the math. There are 3 seats shy, which means that they either need 5 opposition votes or, and we'll talk about this in a minute, or 5 members of the opposition at least just need to have getting their hair done that day.
Yeah.
There's different ways you can make a budget pass.
Different ways you can make the numbers work. So look, I think the highest probability outcome here is that a couple people just don't show up and the budget passes, and we'll all just kind of gloss over this. But there is a possibility that a committed and aligned set of opposition parties who really don't like what's in the budget, and from the sounds of it, no one is entirely happy with what's in the budget. The left's claiming that it's going to be an austerity budget, and the conservatives are saying, we're still looking at multiple dozens of billions of dollars of deficit spending, which is a continuation from our COVID drunken binge. And there doesn't seem to be very much of an effort or a successful effort, at least, to successfully clamp down on that deficit spending and actually fix some structural issues. So it sounds like this is the kind of budget that no one is entirely happy with. It is going to involve significant cuts, and probably significant cuts for the public sector, which makes it almost impossible for the NDP to support. I'll remind everybody that the NDP is currently rudderless and technically leaderless. I mean, they have an interim leader, but they haven't appointed a successor to Jagmeet Singh. So this would be an awful moment for them to go to an election. So they may support it on those grounds. But yeah, this is something that Fred Talluri did a Substack. He's
I saw.
A former political staffer, and he said, look, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to fall apart. And buttressing that, we have a video that came out today on Friday, the 31st, happy Halloween, from Mark Carney that sounds to me like something between a budget amuse-bouche and an early campaign speech. He's speaking he's telling people, like, we in Canada, we need to fix our own problems. We need to, bring our economy back home. We need to do all these sorts of things. But he's speaking about doing these things in the future tense, not the present tense, which is the kind of language that you use if you're setting up a campaign video, or you're doing a campaign video, or making a campaign promise.
Should we use the power gen of technology and our producer, Matt? Should we just drop in a piece of the video here?
Let's do it.
Federal government spending has grown massively over the last few years. That's not sustainable. We will cut wasteful government spending. We'll make massive investments in the things that grow our economy. Homes, new ports, electricity grids, the major infrastructure that will unlock the full potential of Canada. We've built big before.
So that was Prime Minister Carney, in his own words. The thing that jumps out at me, Jen, and God, I'm a cynic. Like, you called it an amuse-bouche. That's funny. First of all, I love the term amuse-bouche.
It's an underused term,
Yeah, it is.
But it's also going to be one of those terms that I'm now going to pull out in my writing subconsciously for 40 or 50 times. So people will get sick of it.
Until I tell you to stop.
Yeah, and then I'm going to have to start retiring it. Anyway, this is writers' problems. But
so, me as just a political observer, the thing I noted about that, and Jen's what you were saying a minute ago, that's a 2-for-1, because if the budget goes through, that video is pre-budget positioning.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, that's going to start showing up on every hockey commercial across the country.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
So they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. And actually, this is the Liberals doing politics and comms pretty good.
They've always been the best at politics. In the last few years, they've been terrible at comms. I'm not convinced their comms are good now, but I think they're less
the bar's been
bad.
reset. Look, so the other thing I would say is I don't know what the appetite actually is to go back to an election. I don't think that Stella got her groove back in the Conservative Party. I don't think that movement is coherent and cohesive at present. I don't think
that get a Dick Van Dyke reference next.
Maybe. I don't think that Pierre Poilievre has figured out what his anti-Carney positioning is going to be. And let's see, even if we did drop the writ tomorrow, when would we have an actual election? Does that take us into Christmas?
The budget actually is due to come down on Tuesday.
Yeah.
There would be opportunity. You could drag that out a couple of days for bargaining negotiations, but you got to call a vote on the thing. Like, you can't let that linger.
Mm-hmm.
Shortest realistic campaign, 4 or 5 weeks. So mid-December.
Right before Christmas. That's not. Nobody wants to be in an election before Christmas. Nobody wants that. So look, as I said, I still put 85% probability on Carney might be just YOLOing this budget and hoping that the votes come together for him. And I think there's a pretty good probability that they might. So I don't know what it is. But hey, man, if we're into an election next week, I'm like, and we didn't talk about that possibility in this podcast, we would look like idiots. So we're starting out there.
So, line audience, our viewers, our readers, our listeners, God bless you, everyone. They come here for incisive, bracing political analysis.
That and we're funny.
And I am not going to give that to them for the next 30 seconds.
Okay.
Can I tell you how friggin' angry I'll be if we have another election? And it's not just that it's going to harsh my mellow for or is already a pretty busy fall on the family front. It's going to be that I have been so mature. I'm so proud of myself because you know what happened just a few days ago?
What?
We passed Carney's 6-month mark in office, and I've been threatening / warning everybody here that I was going to do something after that. Do you have any idea how annoying it's going to be if exactly the time we come around for the 6-month review I've been promising, oops, no, we're having an election actually? It's going to be annoying for me personally, but I also think for the country, I don't think an election is in our interest right now. And I'm saying that as neutrally as possible, but it was almost a year ago where we're 11 months out from Chrystia Freeland pulling her Night of the Long Knives on Trudeau. And remember, and then Trudeau had to kind of do his figuring it out tour of a couple of months before he was like, actually, I can't recover
skiing,
from this.
Which, crucial.
Yeah. Ski in the snow. Mm-hmm. And then then he finally said, okay, I'm out, leadership race. And then Carney came in and smoked everybody and won it. And then we had an actual election. And then we've gone through this 6-month phase of Carney telling everybody, hang on, don't worry, it's coming. If this just leads us right into an election, I am going to write an angry letter. I'm just telling everybody right now, I'm going to have, to whom it may concern, level displeasure to express.
Well, we all knew that members of Carney's prime minister's office had labeled October 31st as Matt Day of Reckoning, and circled it in red.
Yeah, as an all-day calendar appointment.
All-day calendar appointment. So we'll see. We'll see. No, I don't think that the probability of an election is super high. I really don't. I think the appetite for it right now is absolutely zero. But it's kind of, if the election or if the budget did fail, we're going to talk about this in our next segment. The mutual enmity between our former friends and neighbors, the Americans, really has been ratcheted up in recent days. Carney can ride that.
Well,
Carney can ride that.
Yeah, let me throw a completely different perspective at you here. First of all, you're right, but I'm going to throw something else at you entirely. I want to talk about my own analysis of the likelihood of an election. I don't know what exact number I would put to it, but I think, your 15%, I think kind of straddles the right line between, I don't think it's the likeliest outcome, but it's likely enough to take seriously.
Well, and it's likely enough for us to devote a segment to it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Otherwise, we would have started with the Americans because that's sexier.
I think one of the things I was thinking about, and I did read the piece Fred wrote this week. I thought it was interesting. I thought his headline somewhat overstated his argument, but that's okay. It happens. I went and I read the piece, and then I went and I looked at the polls. And then I actually went and I talked to some of my political people. And I think, Jen, you're correct that no one really wants this. And that includes the Liberals. The polling environment right now is weird, where depending on which polling company you're looking at, or even how you ask the question, the Liberals are either looking at a great opportunity for a quick sprint to actually lock up their majority, or they're playing with fire. And I don't think they're confident on that. The Conservatives also have that situation where they're looking at this and going, you know what, we could gain, but we can also lose. Like there are some seats we're not confident we would hold. So I don't think they're raring to go. And to your point earlier, Jen, I don't think they've figured out like a coherent anti-Carney narrative yet that is really working. They're defaulting to every story in the news that happens is bad and it's his fault. And that's good for donations and keeping the base fired up, but it doesn't swing the voters they need swung.
No.
I think conservative chances improve the more time passes. Like I think Carney fatigue will set in, he'll get worn down, and I think they know that. The NDP, the line versus the NDP in a tug of war for charity, the NDP probably wins, but it's not a sure thing. Like we could tug that rope real hard. There's not that many of them left. The only party I think that actually has any interest in this for purely parochial reasons is the Bloc.
Absolutely.
So you can have a couple of conservatives have an upset tummy the day the vote happens, and the NDP could go out and get a perm. And this thing could pass with all the parties officially being against it. There's ways to do that. But in the back of my mind, I've got this little voice telling me the problem is all of the bad, unlikely, low order things keep happening.
Yes.
And I don't know if like universal physics have broken in some way, I'm almost at the point
we're in the bad
where
timeline. We've established this.
If something would be inconvenient or catastrophic anywhere between that spectrum, and it is also landing in the not like kind of probably not, but maybe probability range, I start thinking it's going to happen.
Well, okay. So here's what I'm gonna read too much into something. I'm known for doing this.
Sure.
But that ad that he put out, which we just played, there's only one reason to put out that ad like that, in that way, framed the way that he did. And that is, you're not 100% sure that your budget's going to pass.
Oh, they're not. I know they're not.
Right? So
I don't think they're counting on election. I don't think they want one, but they're not confident.
They don't want an election, but they don't know for certain that they've got the numbers. They're pretty sure they've got the numbers, but they don't know for certain they've got the numbers. So that is they're creating a kind of narrative safety net underneath them, right? That they can then use. It's very reluctantly, we went back to the electorate. The election's not what we wanted right now. We wanted to be focused on the interests of the Canadians, but those dastardly opposition leaders forced us into it because they wouldn't support our good common sense election that would bring jobs back to Canada and make Canada strong again. Like they're creating the safety net. And that tells me that I have a sneaking suspicion that Mark Carney's YOLOing this. I think they're going to go into this election not knowing how many, they're going to go into this budget literally not knowing how many votes it's going to get. And
there's an interesting
hope for the best.
There's an interesting wrinkle to this, though, and we talked about this last week on the podcast. And Jamie Carroll had written an op-ed for us last week about this as well. He wrote a column for us, where one of the things that Jamie and I were both noted, because when Carney gave his speech last week, I went to him like, "Hey, write something." And he was like, "Yeah, I'll probably write something." And then we just kind of texted back and forth a bit. And one of the things he and I both flagged, and he mentioned in his column, was that Carney's speech to the kiddies last week was pretty bracing. It was not all sunshine and lollipops, right? Like it was sacrifice, hard times ahead. And I think Jamie and then us and then a bunch of other commentators have all basically made the point that you can't tell the kids to sacrifice more. Pierre Poilievre gave a speech about that just a couple of days ago. Like his response to it was, you can't ask the kids to sacrifice. One of the reason I'm bringing this up is because that combined with pre-budget leaking, which is clearly signaling, I don't know if austerity is the right word, but the Liberals have been signaling it's not going to be a cheerful budget. Like there's going to be things that are cut. Like there are things that will be protected, but there's a lot of stuff that's not protected.
Carney said straight up, "This is our level of spending is not sustained. We can't continue like this." He's right.
Is that the budget they want to ride into an election on? The sacrifice and pain budget with the snap election? Now the opposition might force them to do it.
Well, the opposition is going to force them to do it. If the opposition forces them to do it, there's a really easy narrative arc around that kind of a budget that allows Carney to portray himself as the adult in the room, right? And I think that one of the major issues that the Conservatives had, and I referenced this before, the Conservatives, and Pierre in particular, hasn't figured out how to run against this government. They've not found their stride. They've not found the right tone. And they still don't have an answer for the question of how does a conservative Canadian react to Trump? How do Canadian conservatives respond to Trump? Do they go full mega? Do they go full business community adjacent, which is just make a deal? Does that come across as unrealistic in light of the last few days? Or do they go more Trump than Trump and say, no, Canada needs to go full on juice state. We're gonna go even harder than Trump in order to strengthen our economy and bring the jobs home. You know what I mean? Like, there's a couple ways that the Conservatives can take this, and they haven't sort of internally
call it ultra hardcore.
Ultra hardcore, right?
I don't remember his exact term, but he took over Twitter and he's like, I don't want you here unless you're ultra hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a couple of paths for them right here, but I don't think that they've come to an internal agreement about how to handle Trump. And because they haven't come to an internal agreement about how to handle Trump, there's no narrative. There's no message discipline around it. In fact, I'm increasingly very frustrated with conservatives in my sphere because to me, they are coming across as horrifically naive.
You know what? Yeah, I hear you.
I don't think most conservatives are actually MAGA. I think that there's some, but I don't think it's actually the majority of even conservatives are even close to MAGA.
Do you mean voters caucus? Like when you say like what conservative
people just in and out of the conservative movement? I think what I see a lot among conservatives is more like a business pragmatism, which is we should just play nice with Trump in order to get ourselves some kind of business certainty, get them off our backs, blah 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 blah.
We'll throw them a bone on Golden Dome and some military stuff.
Like it's their coming authoritarianism is not our problem. We just need to sort of play nice and smile, which, to be honest, is kind of how I think Carney's played it. Now, there's also, I think, an internal dynamic of, do we play pragmatic business partner really, or are we just biding for time, or both, or maybe that depends on the day? So anyway, there's a version of that I can get behind. But when I talk to a lot of Americans and when I talk to some of these business conservative types, the increasing impression I get is frog in water, frog in pot. Right? It's like these guys are like, well, the water's a little hotter. The water's a little hotter. Yeah, there's a bubble here. There's a bubble there. It's not boiling. It's not going to boil. It's not boiling. We're fine. We're fine. Just keep swimming, man. Just keep swimming.
I am profusely sweating, but man, it feels good. It's good for the muscles. But I can still
swim. And I think that's not reality. The water's going to boil.
So,
and by that I mean that the relationship, like there is no business certainty coming. There's never going to be a deal that you can trust and take to the bank. It doesn't matter how we play it. If we play it aggressive, if we play it sycophantic, if we do, there's no obvious correct way to play it to get an outcome that benefits us as a nation.
Yeah, I agree.
And trying to aim for that, or thinking that if only Carney or if only Poilievre would do it this way or that way, well, Trump would like us again and we go back to normal relations. That is fantasy land. And I think that the more people who kind of come around to that realization, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, the better off we are as a nation. So anyway, but we're going to talk more about that, and we're going to talk more about that because we're going to talk about that in the second segment a little bit. But
let me tell you a Canadian element of that, though, and I think you're right. We should probably punt a lot of where we were heading to the second segment. But one of the things that I'm starting to worry about this, and I think it's a problem Liberals and Conservatives both had, but I think the Conservatives have it more because they're the opposition party. If they had won the last one, then the Liberals would have this problem. I think there is almost like a make-believe that has been jointly accepted out of mutual benefit by both of our major parties right now, where kind of in spite of all the evidence to the contrary and growing evidence to the contrary, there continues to be this assumption that a Canadian prime minister or government or party will be capable of managing Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I think rather than us as a country, so as a public, as citizens, whatever, thinking, you know what, we might not be able actually to get through to a deal. It might be 100% reactive, daily, transactional juggling with this guy.
Yeah.
I still think both liberals and conservatives, for different reasons, have invested in the notion of, no, he can be dealt with, and we're the guy to do it. So for the liberals, keep us in power because Trump can be dealt with and we're the right ones. For the conservatives, no, Trump can be dealt with and Carney's doing a terrible job. We'll do a better job. I would like to see a citation for this work, please.
Yeah.
Could these guys please footnote this? Because I think, and I'm going to mention your better half here. Oh, well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Your equal half. Your husband, Alex, wrote an op-ed for The Line this week that I thought was fantastic.
Which one of us is better really depends on the day.
Also the
some
issue.
days
Everybody
it's me,
has
some
strengths.
days it's him. Yeah.
But I think and I'm going to encourage anyone who has not read Alex's piece to go read it. It's long, but I think it's important. Alex, it's funny because when Alex wrote that piece this week, I had just been talking with an American friend of mine a few days ago, just like literally 2 days before that. And I had been looking at some of their polling. American public opinion polling no longer is Democrats, Republicans. It's weird clusters that kind of generally fit into one of those labels.
It's a 7 to 11 point cluster system now.
And Canada's ability to get a deal is contingent on whichever one has the microphone that day. And I think, Alec, your husband did a great job sort of explaining what those problems are going to be. Different factions are going to be ascended at different times. It's going to change sometimes on a daily basis. And the different factions want different things from us, some of which we're not going to want to do. And I think Canadian politics, rather than being like, oh, this isn't good, it's been, no, it's fine. It's just a matter of personal management, where it's like, we got to have the guy in the room. And the conservatives think they need their guy in the room, and the liberals think they need to keep their guy in the room. I'm starting to think this is a shared delusion that we would be better off without.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, we're going to come back to that idea because we are going to talk about the U.S. ambassador. Oh boy, are we ever. U.S.-Canadian relations are not awesome. Doing great. Doing awesome. Anyway, like and subscribe. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca.
This episode is also brought to you by CPA Ontario. If you're looking for a good scare this Halloween, you should check out Canada's economic numbers. Our GDP per capita is down, our business investment is down, and so is our labor productivity. But if there's one thing that chartered professional accountants understand, it's numbers. Informed by insights from chartered professional accountants and leading tax experts, Tax Reform for Growth in Canada, a recent report from our sponsor, CPA Ontario, puts forward 20 pro-growth recommendations for reforming Canada's tax system to make our economy more competitive. While we're talking numbers, let's throw a few at you. The types of taxes that Canada relies on are significantly different than our peers. Canada gets 37% of its total government revenue from individual taxes, 13% higher than peer countries on average. Meanwhile, 22% of Canada's total tax revenue is from consumption taxes like the GST, while other peer countries average 32%. What do these numbers mean? It means that Canada relies too heavily on these types of taxes that hurt economic growth the most. Changing the way we raise revenues would create stronger incentives for work, savings, investment, and entrepreneurship. Here's one more number. In a recent survey, 88% of CPAs believe reforming the personal and corporate income tax system is important. CPAs know numbers. With the federal budget just days away, Canada can't be afraid to take bold action. Visit cpaontario.ca/tax reform to learn more. Well, interesting week. You know, I'm gonna give you, Jen, the straight dope on what happened in the U.S.-Canadian relationship this week. I'm going to set this up so that viewers and listeners who have not been paying attention can get an update.
Sure.
But
it's going great. Everyone's friends now.
Yeah, you know what? I think I might actually take a view later on that might surprise you, but let me just give you the facts first.
Okay.
So first of all, when we were talking last week, the Ford video thing had happened, right? Like we caught that on the last.
The Ford video thing had happened. We talked about this, and our general take on the Ford video, which was the.
Oh yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah,
Doug Ford issued an advertisement, sort of highlighting Ronald Reagan's speeches about tariffs, and created an ad that was running all over America.
Yeah.
Donald Trump freaks out. Donald Trump basically ends trade negotiations with Canada and slaps a 10% tariff on us. That's what happened last week.
So then this week, there's a lot of fallout from that. There's a lot of back and forth. Americans through official and back channel, official and unofficial channels have been telling Canadians that the boss no happy, that Trump is genuinely pissed off about this. The prime minister jets off to APEC and some Asian conferences, and Donald Trump's there. And apparently they had like a nice civil conversation. Finger guns. Yeah, I was going to say,
Finger
in the Globe,
guns.
they're talking about like Trump and Carney are finger gunning each other. So, okay, whatever. We live in a weird timeline. So for a couple of days, it looked almost possible that maybe this was going to blow over and we were going to have some sort of settle down, everybody cools off, and then we get back on track. But then at an event, and it's interesting because so the event was off the record. It was like a U.S. I don't remember what the official group was, but it was like a one of these things that happen all the time.
It's like some kind of event that was celebrating
cross-border
U.S.-Canada
trade, U.S.-Canada relationship. Yeah. Pete Hextra, Hextra.
We've spoken about him at some length previously in the podcast.
So he was at the event, and so was a man named David Patterson, who is the government of Ontario's official representative to Washington, D.C. Provinces don't have ambassadors, but we do so much trade with the U.S. that we often have small teams that function not as diplomats normally, but more as trade reps. So if there's irritants or opportunities to grow business, Patterson is Ontario's guy, and he was at this event, and Huckstra chewed him out. Now, we don't know the exact words that were used, but because this was
expletives were used, screaming
I have
was
been
used.
told that there were screamed F-bombs. Yeah. And we here at the Line obviously would never stand for such a thing. And the interesting thing is, normally, Jen, and you know this is just a tiny bit of inside baseball. If you and I show up at an event and it's an off-the-record event, we respect that. And because we respect that, people don't mind when people like you and I show up at off-the-record events. There is sort of a genteel gentleman's agreement that if an event is off the record or if it's Chatham House rules or whatever, we will abide by that. And when the F-bombs got dropped on the Ontario trade rep, I got told immediately by people who were there that there had been like an eruption at the event. But then I just kind of waited. Who was going to talk about it first? And eventually it began to trickle out on social media that there'd been an exchange. And then the news reported on the social media reports that there had been an exchange. Eventually this all comes to a head with Doug Ford saying that the ambassador should apologize to the trade rep for Ontario. As of recording time, that has not happened.
Okay, so and also just further to the off the record Chatham House Rules event, you can't reasonably expect people to not leak or not talk about.
Well, if you kick a guy in the balls at an off the record panel,
yeah, like come on, like that is going to leak. That's not I've done a lot of Chatham House Rules events. I've hosted some of these events. I've attended these events. I don't think I've ever heard a leak from them. People do understand that if a journalist is invited to that event, that what gets discussed there might inform that journalist's later understanding or analysis. But you don't quote people who were there, or you respect people's ability to speak openly, right? And candidly, and that's healthy. But the idea that everybody in a room of many dozens, if not hundreds of people are going to keep mum in the sight of a display of that nature, that is not a realistic expectation.
Correct.
Yeah, correct. So here's my observing is once again, Hoekstra is speaking in public, and I believe that we've advised against that. Secondly, Hoekstra is a hand-picked representative of the Trump administration, and we can assume that he is either reflecting direct orders from the Trump administration, or he is so very much in alignment in his personality, his outlook, and his goals that it makes no effective difference. Hoekstra is portraying very clearly what America, or what this current administration, thinks about Canada. This administration, my read of this based on his behavior, is that they regard Canada as essentially a poor client state, a group of people to whom,
that's a perfect word.
Yeah, and these are people to whom we owe deference. And cowering. Seems to be the what is expected of us. I mean, I've made this point before, but I think that all of the people last week who got on board with shitting on Doug Ford for issuing that ad were wrong. Not to say like we can have a separate conversation about whether or not the ad was strategically brilliant or not strategically brilliant or anything. That is a separate conversation. This ad has given you clarity. What this has told you is that the Americans will not tolerate us fighting back. They do not think that we have the right to fire back. We are a deferential client state and we must know our place. Yep. And if you are willing to accept that, then the only condition of a deal that can ever be made is one of absolute silence and deference to American authority. That is not a condition that I think any Canadian, regardless of political spectrum, can or will accept. And what that tells me is that any future deal is doomed.
We're talking the last segment about how I think there's this shared delusion right now among conservatives and liberals. I think what you've just identified, Jen, I think you're correct. But I also think this is the conservative nightmare scenario, right? Because their offer on U.S. relations is basically we'll do better. But how? I don't think they can. Look, and the conservatives aren't going to want to sign this deal any more than Carney was. Like, I think eventually we'll get made an offer by the Americans, and I think it'll turn us from a client state into a tribute state.
Well, sure. And look, if the conservatives want to run an election on the idea that we should be deferential to the Americans and we should be shutting the fuck up, go for it. Go for it. I mean, if that's honestly what they think, then I think that they should be honest to what they truly believe. If they want to have us be a subservient client state who knows its place and knows better than to talk back to America, then that is what they should run on. But let's be clear that is clearly with the expectation that is being conveyed to us about what is expected. Secondly, I mean, I've also seen in the press, Gary Mason did a column about this, but this has been circulated in other press outlets as well, that there's a sense that how dare Canada interfere with American domestic politics, that is not our right. And I would just point out that not so long ago, apparently senior members of the Trump administration met with Alberta separatists, and they are actively discussing some kind of loan guarantee. And this claim has not been disputed or challenged by anyone in the Trump administration, to my knowledge. So America has absolutely no moral grounds to stand on to be angry about a province of Ontario openly and transparently creating an ad based on one of their former president's own words. You have no moral standing to stand on that one.
The U.S. fleet is also parading warships up and down the Venezuelan coast right now. But yes, please, I'd like to hear more about how the commercial we aired was a breach of decorum. Was completely inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, like what they're demanding here is an unacceptable double standard, right? What they are demanding here is that we shut the fuck up and be deferential and know our place, but they get to do whatever the fuck they want to us.
And I think, Jen, I don't even think that's an accusation you're making. I actually think that's an accurate description of their worldview. I think that's we, as the preeminent hyperpower, have the right to act in ways that you do not.
Yeah. And how dare you anger our president? Never mind the fact that what can anger a president might change according to like whether or not someone's overcooked the steak or given him a side of ketchup on his chips that day. All right, like we're still a free people, and we still have the right to engage as a free people. And
for now,
I think, well, and any sort of abnegation of that fundamental understanding. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting us to be fully equal with America because their economic and their just sheer cultural weight is what it is compared to ours. I understand that we aren't necessarily going to get full equal terms on a trade agreement. I'm not trying to be unrealistic about that. But there's a point where this doesn't become about trade anymore. This becomes about dignity and rights. This becomes about a fundamental dignity and a respect for our sovereignty as a people. And what Hoekstra is clearly demanding is abnegation. It's not just a deal, it's abnegation. And I think the sooner people get their head around that, the sooner you start to see the playing field before you in much more stark and clear terms. The last point I'm just going to make about all of this, and this is something that I think Americans don't understand about Canadians. Yelling and screaming and pitching a fit at Canadians doesn't intimidate us. All it communicates to us is that you lack emotional discipline. And people who lack emotional discipline aren't the strong, they're the weak. That's all it is. Nobody is cowed or impressed or intimidated by this kind of behavior. All that you are communicating, all that America is communicating or ought to be communicating to us with that behavior is these people are insecure, they're undisciplined, they're weak and unstable, and we can't trust them. They're operating in bad faith. And that's what they're trying to communicate to us.
Can I make a related point?
Yeah.
I think one of the things, and I've had the opportunity this week to speak to a series of colleagues, associates, and friends in the United States. And one of the through lines, even people who we would think nominally are on our side, is that Americans do not understand Canadians.
No.
And I think in general, that's a bit of a statement of the obvious, because I think Americans, I don't even mean this as a criticism. I think this is just sort of whenever any country is the preeminent kind of political, cultural, military, and economic power, whether it was the British 100 years ago, maybe the French 100 years before that, and on and on and on throughout history. Like, I don't assume the average Roman knew much about like the subject peoples in Gaul. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think it's not the way human beings work. But I do think the Americans are underappreciating the extent to which Canadians, maybe if only in kind of a residual way, have pride. And I think Americans as well, probably again in line with American cultural and political preferences, are over invested in understanding everything as economics and financial.
Yeah.
And
everything's transactional. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that they have underappreciated the extent to which the Americans probably, and this is the irony of it, is if they had actually wanted a better business deal, they would have been way better off flattering us. And they like their Absolutely. Economic power would have like flatter us a bit, blow some smoke up our bottom.
And then kind of do that now.
Oh no, I know now, but like if the Americans understood Canada and other countries, they would have been able to probably get a lot of what they wanted with honey instead of vinegar, right? And instead, they, for their own internal reasons, acted the way they did. And I think they continue to underestimate the extent to which, and I'm not even saying this is a good thing, Jen, I'm just saying it is, the extent to which the Canadian response to this is emotional and not rational. I'm actually kind of okay with that because I think you have to have pride. I think you need to.
Also, I'm not even sure I would say that pride is irrational.
I agree.
One of the major problems here is the assumption that that purely focusing on the economics of this is the rational move. I'm not sure that it is. Mm-hmm. But there's something about this story that I think has really calcified something here. Like, before this particular story came out, I think there was a pretty wide swath of mushiness on some of this stuff. And something about hearing that a U.S. ambassador went on an expletive-laden temper tantrum in that environment in public is so contemptible and so pathetic and so indicative of this administration and what it expects from us, and what it expects from us isn't acceptable. Mm-hmm. I can't help but notice the criticisms of Doug Ford have dried up.
Yeah, a lot of them. Let me, I told you before I was going to make a point that might catch some people by surprise. One of the things I've heard this week, and I've heard it from a few people, some of the people I'm hearing it from are just colleagues in the media, but some of them are actually in official-ish places in Ottawa, which is that Huckster is a problem. He should go. That we should either kick him out, which I think would be interesting, or that he's so thoroughly poisoned the well. It would be, if the Americans actually want a deal, to the extent like there are reasonable factions left in the United States government, to the extent those guys prevail, you're probably going to need a new ambassador in Ottawa if you actually want to make any headway here. My instinct, Jen, is leaning the exact opposite direction. I love this guy. He's fantastic. We should mic him up and get him a live stream YouTube channel that never stops. I think every Canadian, particularly those in our senior political and business communities, should have Clockwork Orange level projection of everything the U.S. ambassador to Canada is saying on a real-time basis. because what you were saying a minute ago about how there's been a bit of a calcification, I think that's true. I've felt and heard a bit of that myself. I think it's overdue. I know that Canadians have pride. I know that if you push Canada far enough, there will be an immune system response. But you and I were talking about asshole Canada almost a year ago. Where is it?
Well, this is
maybe
actually,
he's the guy who's going to catalyze
maybe he's the
it
guy.
at long last.
This is actually something I was talking about with my husband this morning. I was like, there's a part of me that almost wishes the Americans would shut off natural gas exports to Ontario. Because in case you aren't aware about how oil and gas actually functions in this world, Alberta's oil and gas doesn't go east-west because, of course, we can't build pipelines in Canada. So instead, what happens is that it circles in a kind of loop, a giant. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but it goes south.
A giant
gets
series
processed
of
in
tubes,
the south, and then
like the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And then it kind of circles. It's a giant circular loop now. So, even if the Americans were to shut off or even just increase shipping charges of natural gas to, say, Ontario and Quebec in the middle of a cold winter, Alberta couldn't supply you. We couldn't supply you. There aren't enough trucks in the world to supply you with the resources you'd need to heat your homes. So if America were to quadruple the shipping charges, if they were to cut off the pipes in order to be fuck you Canada, a lot of people would die, or you wouldn't be able to afford to heat your own homes in a country that is resplendently blessed with ample sources of natural gas, coal, and oil because of what we've done to ourselves. And, there's part of me, I mean, I hate to say this, but part of me thinks that might actually wake people up. That if they did that might actually force a lot of people in central Canada to pull their heads out of their fucking asses.
Well, I'm hoping the Pete live stream would accomplish that without needing to have to freeze to death in the dark.
Well, look, I don't want you to freeze to death. I actually don't want you to be an Eastern bastard who freezes to death in the dark.
Thanks, babe. Thank you.
We've created so many strategic vulnerabilities to ourselves that I think that we're not even.
Oh, I know. Look,
I know. I'm repeating myself now. I know. It's just really frustrating.
Take almost 20 years of Matt Gurney columns, throw them in a blender and feed that into a chat GPT, and probably what you come up with is not that far off what Jen just said. Like, Canada has chosen a policy of reckless naivete and vulnerability because it's easier than doing things that aren't.
It's easy
because
pissing off the mayor of Montreal in the middle of an election year is just something that liberals don't want to do. I get it. It's hard.
A generation or two of Canadian.
And in 3 years, if the Americans cut us off and 20,000 Torontonians die in the cold, how are you going to feel about your political calculus then?
Can I pick which 20,000?
The poorest ones.
Oh, well, I mean, honestly, they would not be the ones I'd pick.
Well, that's what's going to happen. I mean, like I said, but I'm not saying that's going to happen. But I mean, like, this is what you've set up for us. This is this is the direct consequences of your choices. And my God, if Hoekstra screaming at us wakes us up, great. But it's like this is just going to keep on amping up and getting more and more obvious until the unavoidable comes home to roost. And I hope this is enough.
I know. Me too. And once upon a time, I hoped COVID would be enough. I thought tens of thousands of Canadians dying in hospitals that were collapsing and long-term care homes that were decrepit hellholes while we took what was left of our underfunded and undermanned military and desperately used them to fill in gaps in other elements of civil society that you really don't need the infantry backfilling. I thought that would be a wake-up call. And what did we do in this country? We memory hold it. We didn't even have a commission of inquiry. We just forgot that it happened. So I hear you, Jen. I agree with you entirely. As ever, I'm looking for the least painful ways to impart necessary lessons on Canadian leadership. I do, you know what the sad thing is too? I actually do think they're starting to figure out some stuff. I just think they're 5 or 10 years behind, and they're very timid, because I can almost understand that psychologically, Jen. If they really peek in this box, if they really actually gaze upon the contents,
it's a terrible abyss. It's a terrifying abyss. I
remember
get it.
the last scene of Seven.
Yeah, it's a head in a box. I get it.
Yeah.
Look, we don't have too much longer to go. I want to talk about the teacher strike in Alberta and how it has come to an end. It's actually very interesting and it's nationally applicable. So we're going to get into it. Like and subscribe. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca.
Jen, quick personal update from you, if you don't mind. Your life has resumed something more like normal this week, if I'm correct. I know that the Alberta government legislated the teachers back to work. The only detail I wasn't clear on was when that happened. And it wasn't like starting next Monday. Like they dropped the hammer. The kids went back to school.
They dropped the hammer on Monday, and basically school was back in session by Wednesday. So they turned it around quite fast on Bill 2. So a couple interesting things to note about this. One, remember you will recall the teachers have been on strike since the beginning of August. So I mean, I think we're like week 3 of kids not being in school.
October, but yes.
I would say like in addition, a lot of these kids are COVID kids. So a lot of these kids have already missed a lot of school.
Mm-hmm.
It's also clear.
Was it high school too or elementary school?
It was all the schools. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. In Ontario, we divide those up. So.
Yeah. Secondly, it was pretty clear that there was in the course of that 3 weeks, there really was no movement. Neither side was coming to any kind of negotiation. They weren't close. There was even questions about whether or not they were meeting at some points during the strike. So we were getting to the end of after 3 weeks where it was pretty clear that legislating them back was going to be the only way to break the impasse. And in fact, to give you a sense, now this is a government statistic. I don't necessarily take it at face value, but the government was claiming that like the costing of what the teachers were demanding versus what the government was offering in its final offer was in the billions, multiple billions. So this wasn't like we're offering you 17% wage hike and you want 21. These were dramatic demands. And I think the really one sticking point for the ATA is, they were demanding absolute class caps. And the government, I think because the boards were actually also asking for this, we're like, that if you legislate that creates too much inflexibility in the system. There are alternatives. There are larger classes in certain circumstances for certain reasons, and like we can't go about it that way. So it was pretty obvious that a back to work legislation was on the books. That was coming. It was promised. It was signaled, and it came down. Now, why does this become a matter of national interest? One, because if you recall, when I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, I talked about instances in which Supreme Court rulings had led to these unexpected downstream effects over how people could function and how governments could function in the real world. I talked about that in relation to special needs classes and the way that Supreme Court's rulings have made segregated separate special needs classes all but impossible, radically leading to what's euphemistically referred to as complications in ordinary classrooms, which is another way of saying we had to integrate all of the special needs kids and there's no way in hell we had enough teacher support or training to do that. I hate euphemisms. Secondly, in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled effectively that there is a charter-based right to strike, and that this is a foundational aspect of collective bargaining. This was hugely controversial in 2015. Whether or not this was also a turnover or a change from previous court rulings. In 1987, the Supreme Court ruled, there is no constitutionally protected right to strike. Rights only apply to individuals, not collectives. In 2015, the court reversed the decision on this, which changed several generations of norms in which governments did have the legal and legislative right to force essential workers back to work. And I think you could also make the argument it's just fundamentally shifts the power between public sector workers and the employer, which is in the broad sense, all of us, because we are all the employer. The government represents all of us. So in this case, what's happened here is that Danielle Smith has not only legislated the teachers back to work, but she's done it in the most heavy-handed way possible, even to an extent that I think a lot of conservatives are not strictly comfortable with it. So she has preemptively invoked the notwithstanding clause in order to override that 2015 Supreme Court decision.
Yeah. And Canadian journalism conventions require us to note at this time that that's the nuclear option.
Right. Secondly, not only is this legislation, it's not just forcing some kind of binding arbitration. It's actually just saying, no, the last deal we offered you is the deal you're getting. Take it or quit. And it's imposed the final deal in legislation. That'd be super heavy-handed on both fronts. So let's take this in two parts. One, the invocation of the notwithstanding clause. Matt and I have talked about this before, that as the Supreme Court has widened its jurisdiction further and further into governance under the rubric of rights, and by that I mean as the Supreme Court effectively legislates from the bench by expanding the so-called human rights that we as Canadians have, you have seen a concurrent rise in the use of the notwithstanding clause as parliaments have said, no, we run this place. We actually have supremacy here, not you, and have invoked that notwithstanding clause in order to override some of those rights-based decisions, those recent rights-based decisions. And this is an example of that. I think that the use of the notwithstanding clause should be awfully rare. However, it doesn't remotely surprise me that provincial governments and even federal governments are going to increasingly use this as the judiciary and as the Supreme Court expands and limits, expands its role over actual governance of Canadian life by reading more and more quote unquote rights into law. Okay. So I think that's just the inevitable consequence of that. And I think the increasing use of the notwithstanding clause is a direct consequence of changes of philosophy that we've seen play out at the Supreme Court. So I don't think the invocation of the notwithstanding clause, and in fact, by the way, the fact that the notwithstanding clause is even in our Constitution, one of the arguments for it being there was originally posited by Peter Lougheed, who was a former premier of Alberta, who explicitly argued for the notwithstanding clause for just this situation. He said that if a future Supreme Court deemed the right to strike was a charter right, that would irrevocably damage the bargaining power of a government in order to fundamentally function. And it was one of the core arguments that he used to demand the existence of the notwithstanding clause in the first place. So that argument proved to be prescient and correct. This is exactly the argument. This situation is exactly the argument that predicated the creation of the notwithstanding clause in the first place. So I don't think it's necessarily wrong to invoke the clause in this case to force teachers back to work after a 3-week strike. What makes it heavy-handed is that it forces the escalation wheel up a stage further than what it normally might not have been. So what I think most of us were expecting is that the provincial government was going to create legislation to force the teachers back to work. The teachers would challenge that legislation in court, and then the court would decide whether or not an injunction would be granted, an emergency injunction would be granted, permitting the legislation or not. That I think would have been the more ordinary course of action that we were kind of expecting. And I think that the odds of them getting that injunction based on that 2015 court ruling are probably 50-50. The government of Alberta had sort of offered a kind of a binding arbitration model. This made it distinct from the 2015 case. So I think that, whether or not they would have gotten that injunction is 50-50. But it would have increased certainty. It potentially would have added another week to the strike. After 3 weeks, time starts to be of the essence. And I think that they invoke that notwithstanding clause in order to get kids back in class as soon as possible without any sort of drama from the courts. So there's that element of the conversation. Second element of the conversation is the imposition of an actual deal. That's where I think they've probably overreached here. I think that the more appropriate and more restrained approach would have been to send the deal back to a binding arbitration situation. But by imposing the final deal offered, what that communicated to the teachers is your last 3 weeks striking got you fucking nowhere. Mm-hmm. Get your asses back to work. It's not only a matter of getting the kids back to school at that point, it's also a pointed humiliation and a shutdown of labor specifically. As you can imagine, labor has responded very badly to this. They've said this is authoritarian. This fundamentally undermines our charter rights.
Oh yeah, they can read the tea leaves of where that goes.
Well, exactly. And like we're
Yeah.
hearing Strum and Drang about there's going to be a general strike and blah, 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 blah. So what I think is very interesting about this is it's a question for me now about the Smith government has engaged in a very high risk, high reward stratagem here. They've not only forced the teachers back, they've forced the teachers back with the most heavy-handed tools they have at their disposal. Fuck you, get back to the job, and we're moving on.
On our terms, yeah,
on our terms. That's either going to do one of two things. Either that is going to crush this rebellion after some largely symbolic protest action, or it is going to provoke all of labor in the province to start to retaliate in really nasty ways. Because they see this approach as an existential threat to their collective bargaining rights and their ability to wield power over their own members and also vis-a-vis the employer. So either this is going to completely work for Danielle Smith and there will be some spasms of discontent that will dry up in a few weeks, or Alberta's lined itself up for weeks, if not years, of labor unrest because this government couldn't engage in a restrained response. And I don't know what the answer to that question actually is. You'll note I'm talking about tactics, not morality here. I'm speaking about tactics entirely. Either possibility is on the table at this point. So I don't know. It's a really interesting way to see this end, and I think also it will set a really fascinating precedent for other provinces. I don't think that any provinces had the balls to order anyone back with the notwithstanding clause since that 2015 court ruling. So if this works for Alberta, you can bet your bottom dollar that other provinces will engage this tactic as well.
In terms of Matt contributions in this segment, I think they'll be pretty light. I don't have a lot to say about that. I'm mostly still just glowing inside because you said on the record you don't want me to freeze to death, and that was really nice. I don't get a lot of unprompted compliments. Let me make one tangential point. The Canada Post strike was a failure. Canada Post, when the federal government recently had announced that they were authorizing major changes in service delivery for Canada Post, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, went out on strike immediately, just walked off the job, put down tools, as our friends in labor say, tools down. And after a couple of weeks, an increasingly public, unnamed but public comments of, what are we doing? Like, we have fucked ourselves here. This is not the right call. Canada Post, the Crown Corporation, continued to make offers, and eventually the union announced that they were suspending their strike on their own. There wasn't a deal. There wasn't a breakthrough. They just realized, I think belatedly, that they had overplayed their hand. Mm-hmm. And I believe now what they've gone to is rotating strike actions in different parts of the country. What I've noticed, I'm not sure. Do you have a community mailbox in your neighborhood?
Yeah.
How often? Sorry, weird question. How often do you go? Daily? Once a week?
Once a week.
Okay, so in my part of some parts of Toronto, I think do have mailboxes. Certainly, some parts of the GTA do. My neighborhood still has home delivery. What I've been noticing, instead of getting a couple of pieces of mail every day, like once or twice a week, like a gigantic ream of mail is pushed through the old milk thing, because my house is old. The milkman used to put the milk in. Now it's the mailbox. So I connect these two thoughts because I say this more as a historian than as a journalist. But like, if there is kind of a missing piece of the social puzzle in North America right now, it's a strong, organized labor movement. And I keep kind of looking around at the conditions of everything. And you mentioned the term, like the teachers are calling for a general strike. Can I just say, again, no morality assessment here, just purely pragmatic. I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen a general strike somewhere in North America anytime in the last 20 years.
Labor is fairly weak in Alberta compared to other provinces. So like, I'm not even sure that they have the org. Yeah, well, I don't think they've got the chutzpah to pull it off. But there's a second thing that I think that needs to be acknowledged here, and that is I think there's a really, really big difference between private sector unions and public sector unions. The logic and prevailing theory that these are, it's all one labor unit, one labor movement. I don't think that's correct.
I don't think we should have public sector unions.
Well, I mean, I can understand that the need for collective bargaining, but fundamentally, a private sector union is using its collective power in order to secure fair access to profit. I think that's legit. I have no issue with that. Go steelworkers, go. I think that is a profoundly different conversation than when you have essential government employees who already hold a lot of power in society by virtue of the fact that they're essential employees, use the same kinds of tactics and approaches that private sector unions do, especially considering they're not trying to gain fair access to profit. They're trying to gain disproportionate access to taxpayer dollars.
Tax revenues.
To tax revenue. That means not only do they have the additional powers that exist as a voter and a citizen engaged in a civic society, but they're also using and applying the logic of collective action and combining it with the fact that they're essential workers, that they need things to run appropriately, that they're needed for things to run appropriately, to not be of service to society, but rather to get what they can get out of society. And I think that that's the wrong ethic for a public sector worker to have. This is not to say that I want public sector workers to be underpaid. I don't. I want them to be absolutely amply compensated. And as far as I can tell, most public sector workers absolutely are amply compensated, especially when you consider the fact that they have disproportionate access to benefits. And I want them to have disproportionate access to benefits. I want them to have good pensions. I want them to have all of these things. And I know a lot of people would say, well, they wouldn't have all of these things if they didn't have unions. And I think that's right. But the ability of a government to legislate essential workers back to work is pretty foundational to governance, because if you don't have that, then your entire government, the functioning of the society has the ability to just not work anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not the same thing as somebody at a steelworker plant or somebody at a car plant going on strike because they're getting insufficient wages or they're getting insufficient access to the profit, to disproportionate profits, right? Like, it's a very different conversation. So I think that we need to see these things as two very different spheres of influence. I don't think they're the same.
No, but they do overlap, and they
do overlap,
especially on basic things like cost of living, working conditions, social
absolutely.
issues. And that's the area where I'm surprised that, like, you haven't had a general strike right across the board to protest Uber Eats fees are too high, or the president's an asshole, or like whatever. The reason I just bring this up, Jen, I bring the Canada Post thing. Are we not going to see it, or is it just going to be massive when it belatedly arrives?
I think that the logic for a general strike is very different than the logic for a protracted teacher strike, right? Like, you can't give a teachers union carte blanche to dictate how a public sector how public education is run. They're stakeholders in the conversation about how public education is run. Who else is stakeholders in that conversation? The boards, the government, the parents, and the kids. They're only one stakeholder, right? They should not have the unilateral right to dictate, right? And if you eliminate the government's ability to legislate the teachers back to work, then what you have effectively given the teachers is the unilateral ability to dictate how public education is run and funded. And no one union has the right to dictate that, right? So, I'm pretty sympathetic to teachers, because I think most teachers are kind of between a rock and a hard place, especially in Alberta. I mean, I've talked about this at length. But I think that there's a good possibility that what we're seeing here is going to be a tactic that we're going to see other provinces roll out in the rest of the country, now that one province has sort of said, no, get your back, like, we're not going to continue to tolerate a strike indefinitely, and we are going to order you back. And if that means being in contravention of the Supreme Court, so be it. Now that one province has cracked that, it's going to be easier for other provinces to follow suit. I don't think a weak labor movement generally is a good thing for the country. I don't think it is, especially when we're talking about areas of private endeavor like gig economies, Uber Eats workers, service workers. I mean, one of the things that I would have loved to have seen the actual private sector public unions take on is temporary foreign workers. I would have liked to have seen them be really, really muscular in their opposition of temporary foreign workers, for example.
They were just focused on getting a good deal.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like that is the place where they have a real role to play in civic society, right? Like I think private sector, like unions are important in civic society, but that doesn't mean that all unions are the same, and that doesn't mean that only one stakeholder gets a say in how things are run in a society, right? But anyway, I'm trying to give a nuanced perspective on this. I'm not trying to say like all unions are bad.
You're doing a great job.
Well, I'm trying. I don't know if I'm saying it as articulately as I maybe would want to.
You're doing fine. And I think your bigger picture comment, I think, is bang on. And just to add a little soupcon of extra complications. I'm not making any predictions here, but can I just make a comment that I don't think will be controversial, that we live in uncertain times where there is geopolitical stability, there's political instability, there is economic instability, increasingly there's military instability. To that, start to consider the possibility of significant labor instability. We start putting these things together, and our civilizational dashboard has an awful lot of lights that are blinking at least yellow. It's an interesting time.
We've been talking about that at some length. But anyway, like, look, yeah. I don't think the average worker in Canada is done better off with a weaker labor movement. I think that's correct. But if there's one thing that I think a labor movement isn't doing itself any favors by, it's by trying to conflate the logic of a private and a public sector union.
No.
That's not serving. That's not
serving. Textbook examples of their own worst enemy.
That's exactly right. That is not. I don't think that's strategically smart. And I think the other problem with that as well is, as I said, it's. I think that being a public servant is a kind of a privileged position, and I think that to try and engage in protracted long strikes of essential workers is an abuse of that privileged position. It's an abuse of the command to service, which is what these things are what these jobs should fundamentally be about. That doesn't mean that I think that they should be exploited or underpaid or overworked or anything of the nature. I want, public sector workers to be well and fairly employed as an employer. I want them to be well treated. But that doesn't mean that I think that they should have a carte blanche to walk off the job indefinitely in order to make single-handed demands above and beyond every other stakeholder when we're talking about matters of deep public interest, not just private interest.
Yeah. You know what, Jen, I got nothing really to add. I think you've said it well. I'll just say, like I said in one of the earlier segments here, I keep waiting to see a Canadian immune system response. All the things we're talking about here are organ systems within a healthy body politic. And the vital signs aren't great for any of them, right? Like there should be a natural tension between labor, courts, governments, the citizenry. These things in a perfect world are operating, never in perfect balance, but they're applying reasonable moderating forces on each other. We're going to be at the point soon enough where, I say this obviously tongue in cheek, but where the Supreme Court will just be directly educating our children while we argue about whether we should use the notwithstanding clause to stop that from happening, right? So anyway, yeah, no, I hear you. And the important thing is, how many days did you end up having a house full of kids? You were up on count 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, it was probably about, one week I had 2, so it's about 4.
Interesting experience?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Kind of fun in some ways. It's as I said, teaching kids is not my calling. It's not my vocation. So I have a lot of respect for people who do it. It's just not what I'm drawn to for obvious reasons. But it was still fun to be able to do it. It was interesting. And God bless, I'll say, who the real hero of the strike is? The real hero of the strike was Dollarama. God bless Dollarama, because you can go to Dollarama and for a couple of bucks, you can find a craft that will
books
paint, plasticine. My favorite craft that we did Halloween terrariums and a little snow globe. I think it wound up costing me $3 per kid. It was phenomenal. Dollarama, the unsung hero of the 2025 Alberta teacher strike.
Well, Jen, you said you're not born to educate children. You were born to pod.
Yeah. Great.
All right,
I'm doing society a real service.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, look, Jen, happy Halloween. to you,
Happy
the kids. I
Halloween.
hope it's a great one. Obviously, let's go Blue Jays. I would like to start watching the Leafs soon. So, like, sooner or later, I'd like the World Series to end so I can go back to my other sport. But in the meantime, let's go Blue Jays. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca. Go there, like, subscribe, do all the good things. I really friggin' hope we don't have an election, but who the hell knows? We live in weird times. We'll talk with you soon, guys. Have a great weekend.